Women in Venture Capital. How to level the playing field.
I'm very sorry. We were supposed to have another woman in venture capital joining us for this one, but I have to say this is the first point for our talk. Given the diversity and gender equality in the industry, it was really hard to find speakers for this session, and this is what we're going to talk about. Osmin, so I'll give you a few minutes to introduce yourself, who you are, what you do in Malta, and about your journey in the VC industry.
So, great, this is working. So, my name is Osmin Callis. I build disruptive startups. Now, I've been doing this for a very long time. There are several components to it, actually. And those components consist of the actual product development side of things, the operational side of things, and then going out and distributing the product development. So I have, throughout my career, been involved in... closer. Is that better? Oh, good. Thank you. Been involved in each of those areas. Those threads have actually combined now for me to set up a venture studio, which is an asset class which is hot. It's growing. It's actually been in existence since 1998, when the first person called Bill Gross created Idea Labs, and he noticed that Silicon Valley was leaving their founders that were going through the various accelerator programs slightly unprepared. Once their money had run out, they didn't know what to do. Also, once their funding ran out, they didn't know once they'd been through the accelerator program, they didn't know what their options were then. So he came in and filled a gap. So it's been a good 20 years that this asset class has been rising, and now there are around about 1,000 venture studios globally. And my venture studio is called Mode8. The important thing about venture studios is that they have a unique process-driven, data-driven way of innovating and of delivering value by creating that value or investing in that value. So they are akin to venture capital. They're very similar to venture capital, but the difference is that they are very hands-on. So they will actually be involved in I will create new startups. And we have within our venture studio a process that we have defined and refined and are constantly refining for creating and validating new startups. Now, the Molter element is where that comes in is that we've identified that there are opportunities that are unique to this location here. We have very good links with the Maltese government, Malta Enterprise. And so what we do is we work with some of our startup founders to help them to expand, because one of the biggest challenges that startups face is internationalization. So at the right point in a startup's journey, in its evolution, they should be thinking about scaling. And there are multiple ways in which a startup can scale. And one of the ways that startups have, or one of the options that are available to them, is by setting up a new office overseas. So that's why we established our Malta office, to help our startups in the UK and other locations to actually expand by getting access to some of the support that is available here, because it is an incredibly welcoming, innovative and regulatory kind of friendly environment.
So you work with startups, you work globally. What were the biggest challenges for you as a woman to come to this point, to where you are now in the VC industry?
I guess there are a couple, really. I wouldn't say that the challenges that I faced are typical, because the first third of my career, I worked in investment banking, and it was a really naturally, organically diverse environment.
Where was that?
Well, I actually worked for almost all the major investment banks in the UK.
UK.
But in the UK, yes. So when you said where, I thought you meant which bank. But that was in the UK. But what I have found since then is that when you are coming out of an environment where you are used to the culture, because you will adapt to the culture that have either created in your own business or that you are used to because you are maybe working at a VC or other organization elsewhere. But when you're coming out of that culture and you have to step into another environment, into another country or another organization, and you take for granted that you would be recognized for your skills, your merit, and it doesn't always happen. So something that happened to me was I was leading a trade delegation to a country in, let's say, Central Asia, i.e. the Middle East. And I was told that as a woman, and also as a black woman, because I can't actually separate the two, that I needed to bring somebody who's either white or Asian, ideally a man, with me so that I would be taken seriously. So it just didn't make sense for me to be the representative of the company because the fear was that I just wouldn't be taken seriously. That's happened a couple of times. So there's that sense of being taken seriously. But then what you have to do is do internal work, not to allow that to embitter you, not to allow that to taint your view of what's possible. And essentially realize that most of the world is full of decent people.
How many, are you in touch with many female investors?
I am.
So by percentage, what would you say? Is it
Tiny proportion.
Tiny proportion.
So last count, my understanding was that there are about 4.5% globally. So it's a very, very small cohort, vanishingly small. But the numbers are growing, and there are really useful initiatives that are, I guess, stimulating interest.
So what do you think needs to be done for the industry to have more women investors, more women tech entrepreneurs, more women startup founders? Are you dealing with a lot of startup founders, female founders?
Yes, but I deliberately don't, and this is going to sound slightly, I guess, unexpected, but I don't develop specific tracks that focus specifically on female founders because it actually becomes self-defeating. So what happens is if people say, oh, well, she's only focusing on female founders, they will expect that the bar has been lowered. They will expect that they're getting, I don't know, some of the things that other founders would be held to account to, that they might not be held to account to the same standards. So privately and behind the scenes, I will explore and engage with women founders and do my best to help them to level up. The important thing is the leveling up, where you see there could potentially be a gap, a delta in where they are and where they could be, is providing those support mechanisms. But in terms of the evaluation, it has to be the same methods and processes for evaluating VCs, and deal flow is another word that we use for founders. Otherwise, as I say, it becomes self-defeating. So my advice is to actually be incredibly willing to do the work, develop self-awareness, and then find the right people that you can recruit to your team to be your board of advisors, your mentors. You know, if you might be weak on public speaking, or you might be weak on financials, or you might be weak on whatever it is, find somebody to help you with that to close the gap yourself, but initially develop that awareness. The other thing is data doesn't really seem to matter. People like who they like. You can present as much data-driven analysis that tells you, well, you know, having women is good because on your board is good because it drives, you get better outcomes. People like who they like, and they're drawn to who they're drawn to. So the data, I don't think necessarily makes as much difference as people would like or imagine that it would. So I wouldn't get too bogged down in the data, because the people who are making the decisions, male and female VCs, are driven partially by that, but not exclusively. Their gut feel, their emotional disposition, that rapport, that connection that they make is also incredibly influential too in the outcome.
Well, I've been a conference organizer for the past 5 years, and I started in Asia. We hosted events in Hong Kong and in Singapore. And I came across several speakers who I've been, had been interviewing, and some of them actually signed a memorandum saying that they would not participate on a panel discussion if at least 50% of speakers presented there are women,
Okay.
female. Same with the overall conference agendas, but this is specific to Asia.
Right.
Let's put it this way.
That's interesting.
They most probably will not come and participate in your conference and speak on your stage if at least 50% of your speakers are female.
Okay.
On the other hand, there are. I remember hosting an event in Hong Kong, and we wanted to put together a session which was about women in blockchain and women in fintech, and we were connected to Women Female Society of Tech Founders and Tech Leaders, and they said, "No, we don't to be put on stage in a spotlight as specifically women, because we are, first of all, tech entrepreneurs.
Right.
We don't want you to focus on the fact that we are women. Do you support these public initiatives to women empowerment? Are you aware of any local or European initiatives like that? And what else can industry do to increase the number of female founders, female investors, and what are the tools and the engines for gender diversity here?"
So there's this concept of the golden skirt, where there are stipulations in corporate environments, sometimes in public sector policy, that require the proportion and the representation of women to be set at a certain level. Thank you. I'd start that again. Thank you. So the concept of the golden skirt, I don't know if anyone's heard of that. Particularly popular in the UK, possibly the US, and this is where particularly large corporates, but corporates in general, plus public policy stipulates that representation of women has to be at a certain level. So do I agree with the golden skirt? Well, I think you have to look at the outcomes. What's that actually done? What you often find in these environments is that you get women rising to a certain point, but then they don't seem, even with all of these interventions, to be able to break through into those upper echelons.
Glass ceiling, right?
Of a sort, yes, exactly. And so, again, I think that the situation is relatively complex. I'm not a massive fan of these sorts of, and I'm going to call them artificial interventions, because two things have happened.
Definition of it.
Yes, two things have happened in my life. I don't know if you're familiar with this idea that if you're somebody who's considered themselves to be slightly marginalized, or particularly marginalized, what this does is that it drives you to do better. So I've never had a hand up. I've never been chosen for any specifics outside of the merit that I bring to an initiative, a project, whatever. And I've worked incredibly hard. But what that's actually allowed me to do is to develop my competitive edge and to be better than most of my peers. The democratization that technology brings has allowed me to access a market without necessarily having to go through the same channels. So I think that the tools are out there that allow peer-to-peer interactions. You can now find a VC on LinkedIn who might have an investment thesis, which is, just switching tack for a moment, that is more in line with what you think you might have to offer in terms of your company and your sort of corporate development. I believe that I won't call it a level playing field, because I don't ever believe that it will be. I believe that there will be advantages that people will enjoy who have various traits that we don't have to get into. And I think this idea of creating these artificial dampeners is actually unhealthy, because what we're missing out is what happens to those people who have found that they have to work a little bit harder. Eventually, when they can escape and find that open ground, they go really far and they go fast and they go quickly. That's what's happened to me. But sometimes people aren't interested in that side of my story. They just want to hear the continual narratives of oppression and how downtrodden I am and how difficult my life is, I actually haven't had a particularly difficult life. I'm surrounded by amazing people. I've had amazing mentors of all varieties, but I've also had very strange experiences. So in summary, I'd say that the golden skirt probably doesn't generate long-term sustainable outcomes. And I think through working on tools, products, and services that give individuals direct access to the markets that they are trying to reach is by far the best option.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. I wish we could go on for another
It's been
30
lovely
minutes.
talking to you, Olga. Thank you.
One last question.
Sure.
Who is your favorite female leader?
Ooh, that's a fantastic question. Does it have to be in the tech or the
No, not
financial
necessarily.
space?
It can be Beyonce.
Well, she's a brilliant businesswoman. I have to say, my favorite leader actually is no longer with us. It was a lady called Wangari Maathai, who was a tree planter in Kenya. She understood the effect of deforestation on her environment, and she started a movement getting local people to plant trees. She understood the mentality and mindset, the consciousness of the people, and how to influence and transform the lack of awareness into direct action. And she left an amazing legacy.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Osmin Callis, Mode8 Venture Studio.
Thank you.
Make sure, again, to catch up with Osmin off stage. Thank you.